Hey everyone, welcome to this case study webinar with the wonderful Sandi DuBowski. We're so happy to have Sandi here, and thank you so much for joining us to talk about your wonderful film and the incredible release that you've had or we've had over the past year with it. Yeah, do you have anything you want to say before we get started, or I'll just you know jump right in.
Just excited to be here and yeah, thrilled to talk with you and Eight Above and all of you.
Yeah, great. So, oh, just some like a little housekeeping. Please keep your Zoom on mute. And also please don't, the chats for questions. And we have moderators who are moderating the chat, but don't sometimes people go a little overboard in promoting their films. So this isn't really the time to do that. So we just request that you guys restrain from that a bit. Maybe one post is fine, but more than that, it's a little much. Great. So, all right. So I always start with what was the goal of your release? So what
Mm,
were you trying to accomplish and what are you trying to accomplish with the release of the film?
mm. This is a film that I spent 21 years making. So clearly it's deeply personal. And I was willing to put the years into my making of the film, and I'm willing to put the years into its movement. It is something that I just wanted to reach, a wide array of people. I wanted to um, really think about power and control over my own film's distribution. Um, I wanted to transform hearts and minds. Uh, I wanted to generate revenue in the process. I wanted to share sort of this craft and the work and be recognized as a filmmaker for this kind of midlife film in some ways. Like, I'm finished Trembling Before God the day before I turned 30, and I just celebrated my 55th birthday. So, this is a different stage of my career, a different stage of my life. Um, so yeah, I think those were some of the goals of making it.
Right. But as anyone who's heard me on these webinars before knows, like I always try to hone that down to one goal. And
Yeah.
I know what it is because I know from our early strategy sessions, like what it was. So I'm kind of curious whether it's still that same, whether you will reiterate that same goal that we talked about and kept in mind throughout. And I'll give you my impression of what that was
Mm.
otherwise. So,
Yeah, I wanted to really create a very face-to-face, kind of people-powered movement of the movie, from community to community. I
yeah.
think that
Yeah.
is really distills sort of the way that I think about the values of
Yeah.
distribution.
Yeah, and for me, that falls into the audience bucket, that you want as many people to see it, but with the caveat that you want people to see it in community with other people, and
Yeah.
preferably as much as possible with you in the room with
Hmm.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I don't know if that, I mean, I had that idea in the beginning, and I think it's just gotten more crystallized and reaffirmed as we've gone through the distribution. But yeah,
yeah.
those early conversations with you were really helpful to think about sort of which directions we would go and where this distribution would land.
And so while we're on this, I'm just going to ask another, just because I reiterate this a lot. So, how important to having that singular focus to what you accomplished or what you're in the process of accomplishing? Was it important to have that as a guiding light, and not get distracted with other possibilities that you might have accomplished?
So I think I was open to all paths. I mean, this hybrid model of distribution was definitely something that I held dear. I have an experience with Trembling Before God and another film that I did called A Jihad for Love that I produced, where I worked with distributors. Um,
Hmm.
and, I never considered them, I never signed with a distributor. I signed with a partner in distribution.
Hmm.
And it was a
Right.
real collaborative effort. But the industry has changed and,
Right.
windows have changed and theatrical has changed. And, I still was open to possibilities of broadcast, of streaming, at the initial get-go. And I had a sales agent, Annie Roney of Roco Films. You were on the team. Like we did explore multiple pathways, but it just became more and more clear post Tribeca Film Festival, which, was in June and our world premiere, that, by kind of end of summer, early fall, maybe, it was just like, actually, this is the path.
Hmm. Right.
Um, but, we were open. I was curious to
Right.
sort of test out the market.
Right, right. So I guess my next question was about like the tactics for the release, but that's kind of like what we're into now, which is this long, the initial tactic was this long theatrical release, pretty
Mhm.
early into your festival release. So
Mhm.
why, in a sense, I mean, I guess in a sense we've already answered that, but why did you feel like such a long theatrical release would be, you know, part of the key components of what you're doing?
Well, I didn't exactly know how that would unfold. I mean, I
Right.
knew you had to, have the big premiere in New York. And once, IFC Center said that they would like to launch our theatrical, and once the Lemley theaters in LA, said that they would like to launch our LA theatrical, then that became solid ground. Like, okay, here is the end of the year launch, November on. But I think our booker, you know, Cindy Bannock, who's on
Who's
here,
in the audience?
yes, had truly no idea. She said, Sandy, we started booking this film in November. It is like end of summer. Like, how is it still going? Like, we have, I mean, it's incredible, but it definitely is not the norm, and it's not necessarily the model of traditional distributors. Um, to keep a theatrical going. I mean, in some ways, it's really like music. Like, I really think of this as like the band model. Like, we're going city to city, and it's hard because you can't sort of simultaneously book a film in multiple cities at the same time because of the personal presence
Mhm.
that booking requires. So, it's definitely a different model, which actually I think is such a successful model, at least for me and for a number of other films right now.
Right. Well, to explain, like, so what was going on and what caused Cindy to pull her hair out so much was uh, that so Tribeca was in June, so you were kind of still in the midst of your festival release
Mhm. Yeah.
when the theatrical launched. And so it was, and then the second difficulty, quote unquote, difficulty or the challenge was that you wanted to be at nearly every
Mhm.
screening possible. So you would be going to all the festivals, but then you also wanted to. So that created this kind of checkerboard with your schedule. We had to set up a schedule, like an online schedule,
Wow.
and hats off to Cindy to try to coordinate all of that. Yes, Cindy is incredible and wonderful. And the fact that she was able to pull this off with, I still remember, I'm having PTSD a little bit of, oh my God, we have to do this, but Sandy's in Europe, and like, when's Sandy coming back? And so I think that's
Wow.
part of also the length, because since you wanted to be at all these
Sure.
places, that just meant that, because normally you know, you would be doing most of these within the first month, and you'd let, and then 2 months, 3 months, and then at 3 months, you're kind of, that's like a 90-day window, which has been kind of resurrected as of late. Um,
Mhm.
but to do that, you can't be traveling to festivals. And then you also are probably not going to be at a lot of those screenings. Even if you're not doing festivals, there's going to be a lot of screenings happening when you're not there.
Yeah. I mean, we are
Yeah.
now in, I think it's about 55 art house cinemas. I think I've
Yeah.
had 95% of those theatrical. In terms of film festivals, I think we're up to at least 75 or 80 film festivals, and I've been in the majority of those.
Right.
So, yeah, it was always, but it was also holding out for the best cinema in a city. And
Hmm.
because, the theatrical has changed so much and that there are less screens, and there is content fighting for all of those screens, then, we wanted to make sure that in Boston we would be at the Coolidge Corner and that we could get
Right.
in Detroit a booking at, the Detroit Film Theater in the big museum. I mean, so we were really also trying to, you know, Cindy was working her magic with all these bookers. Um,
Yeah.
so sometimes that took time as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool. So what kind of just moving on, like what do you think of all the different kind of marketing tactics do you feel is the best for getting butts in seats?
Mhm.
Like what are kind of like the essential elements and because there's all these different things like social media ads, other forms of ads, organic social,
Yeah.
press outreach, and then obviously eventizing, which we
Mhm.
talk about a lot. um
Yeah.
what do you feel like was most essential?
So I think, number one is eventizing,
Hmm.
because these days, um, we did get week-long theatrical runs in a number of cities from Santa Fe to um, where else?
Like
Like
Atlanta.
Atlanta.
Yeah.
Yeah, multiple cities we had a week-long run, but that is not the norm for documentaries in cinema. So sometimes we would get one show, sometimes we would get two shows. Sometimes it's a run of a few nights. So I think that um, really showing up and trying to sell out that big show, or like I went to Houston, to do a Houston theatrical at this theater called the River Oaks. It was packed. I mean, we had, I think, 270 people, and the theater was like, great, we're gonna book another show,
Mhm.
so I think, you show up, and I actually did that screening with the CEO of the Montrose Center, which is a LGBTQ center in Houston. And the CEO is a transgender woman who's Jewish, and Avery, and she's incredible. And she has a draw. And
Mhm.
so, in every city, I would try to bring in somebody who is a community leader, whether they be in the Jewish world, in the queer world, in the film world, in the kind of multi-faith world. Those were my kind of buckets. I mean, determining what my core audiences were and then really digging deep into those audiences was very, very key. But everybody knew that they were coming together in community. Like sometimes
Mhm.
there were organizations that co-sponsored the screening. Like, in Minneapolis, in Main Cinema, we had a Jewish queer group that was one of the co-sponsors, and they tabled outside the theater. So they
Mhm.
drove their audience. Um, but yeah, I had like, and sometimes it was very prominent folks like, Esther Perel, or, you know, like Krista Tippett from NPR and On Being, a lot of directors. Like, I was sharing with John before that when we went to Dayton and Yellow Springs, I reached out to Stephen Bognar, who made American Factory, and he did the Q&A for both those films and spread the word. So that was very key. Now, sometimes I also did just one-on-one, me and the audience, and that
Mhm.
was great too. So I would say eventizing is one piece. Um,
Well,
Clipboard.
let's actually, why don't we just continue with eventizing and then move on to other aspects. So what are some of the other ways and the kind of unique ways that you eventize this? Because you did do quite a number of unique, besides, you being there, then you bringing in like a significant person from the community, those are two, great ways. And
Yeah.
but what you did some kind of unique things.
Yeah. And I would say that, like, sometimes it's a director, but the protagonist of the film, I mean, it's about Rabbi Amichai Lau-Lavie. So,
Mhm,
he's busy, like, he's rabbiing. So,
mhm,
as much as I can get him on the road is great. But often after a while, he really wanted to do something deeper than just a Q&A. So, what we did,
mhm,
we set up rituals. So, for example, when we went to Boston, we did a Sabbath Queen Friday night feast at this place called Mamala's, which was really, really beautiful. And, it's his everybody friendly, God optional, artist driven pop up kind of ritual. And, sometimes like in San Francisco, we did a soul spa. So we would have like a daytime on Saturday where we would do like a contemplative ritual music, event. So, that was another way of like building community, infusing ritual into the experience. Like I did one in Hudson without him, but other people in his lab shul, synagogue. And, we had a local chef who said, I would love to be in. She saw the film in Rhinebeck at the Upstate Films in Rhinebeck, and she was so moved that she said, I want to do a Friday night feast. So we went back to Hudson and opened at Time and Space for a night, and we did this ritual. Amichai wasn't available, so we had other people who were involved, and she just like created this incredible feast, and like people remember this night for like they're going to remember it for years. And she and I
mhm,
built a bond, and now actually she moved to Madrid, and she was just at my house, and she's like before like she was in New York, and she said, "You're going to Warsaw in November. Maybe I can come to Warsaw and do a Friday night feast there." So I just think that there's like so many ways in which this has trails, like tendrils. Like you do something,
mhm,
you build that relationship, you build that community, and it leads to things. I wound up meeting a reverend at our theater, at our festival premiere in Atlanta, Letitia. She's a reverend at Emory University. And when I went back for theatrical a few weeks later, she did an interfaith Q&A with me and pulled in this trans minister to do it with us. So, like, I just think it's about like thinking about being an organizer and a community builder, whether in the cinema or infusing ritual into the cinematic experience. And I think no matter, what our films are, you could create debates. You can create like we had the whole audience go to a separate venue from the theater so that we could do a smaller group discussion in a
mhm,
circle and not just a
mhm.
kind of frontal to the stage. So, look, people are craving community right now. It is like we're living in a time of loneliness, of polarization, and I just think that the more we can invest in that, the better. Um, and the other way that I think is really key is we put out mailing lists in the audience. And I have done this since Trembling Before God in 2001 and have built a mailing list of thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It is the simplest thing to do. Just get a clipboard, print out a sign-up sheet, and do not give your data to the algorithm. Like
Mhm,
they should not be owning our audience. We need
mhm.
to communicate and connect with our audience. And I'm amazed that filmmakers aren't doing this because a
Yeah.
mailing list is so important right now, whether on, FileMaker or Substack or whatever. So yeah, I think that's really key too.
Yeah. No, I'm very strident about that and kind of
Yeah.
shocked when filmmakers don't do that.
Yeah.
And, and just I'll say is that people, that I've heard this from impact producers as well. People will put their names and emails down on a piece of paper sooner than they'll use a QR code. Like some people, especially young people, use a QR code more, but the vast majority of audience will use a clipboard more. But at the top of the sheet, say print legibly in big,
Yeah.
strong letters, because someone's going to have to transcribe all of that. But yeah. So one
And,
thing
and
is,
and and do it in a
yeah,
grid. Create a
yes.
grid of letters. So each letter goes in a box. So that's a tip
Hmm.
from Gary Meyer, who founded Telluride. He was like, if I can give you one tip for your release, this is a tip, and it's great. We see they write the J and then the K, and it's like,
Oh, that's actually brilliant. Yeah,
yeah,
that's actually news to me. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay. That's
good.
a pro tip right there.
Pro tip
Um,
from the legend.
so one yeah, of course you are. One question
No, no,
that
no, from
actually
Gary
came up.
Meyer from Telluride.
Oh,
Like,
Gary Meyer. Yes, yes, Gary Meyer. Yes, actually, that's actually funny that he, of all people, because he's, yes, definitely a legend, that he would be so particular about this one thing that, yes,
yeah.
that sometimes I feel like an idiot for going on and on about mailing lists. But so the interesting thing that you did is that some of these events were not at the cinema, that they were like the soul spas were often like on Saturday during the day or some off time, and then were those separate ticketed events, and was the idea that basically the fact that you were doing this kind of in a sense promoted the whole event in a sense, like it became, yes, yeah, it was
Yeah,
another thing to actually, yeah.
it was like a package experience. It was like, oh, the Sabbath Queen crew is coming to town. Like, oh wow, we can go see the film. Oh wow, we can go have this ritual feast. Like, or we can have this like deeper discussion. So it was, yeah, I mean, it really increased partnerships. I mean, sometimes it was houses of worship that just gave us space. Sometimes it was like, an intense rental fee.
Mhm.
That, ugh. Sometimes we would, it was like a ritual and food. So you would have
Yeah.
people pay if it was a meal. Um, so yeah, it was like trying to find partners or sponsors, to underwrite things as well, in different cities. But yeah, I mean, it just depended on the city. I guess each city was so different. And sometimes
Mhm.
like, in Detroit, like I have never been to Detroit.
Mhm.
So, I hired someone in Detroit to be our outreach person, and she devoted a few hours to, really sending out the email blast to like all these different organizations, really posting it, on different newsletters and mailing lists and, she actually went around and put up flyers because Detroit's very like flyer based in cafes and like community centers. And so, I hired some outreach people, certainly in LA and New York, because they're so massive, but also
Mhm.
Philadelphia with Cindy Burstein. And, I really tried to be careful because, there's, it costs money so I wanted to be very strategic about where we would hire. And, I've built up enough distribution now that I have someone now working for me full time, and she's
Mhm.
also doing, outreach and research, as well to figure out like who we outreach to in different
Yeah.
cities for our theatrical.
Yeah, so I guess that just moves straight into kind of like the next thing for butts and seats is after eventizing, or actually kind of hand in hand with eventizing, is outreach.
Mhm.
Is that we find that that's kind of like this one of the strongest ways to get butts and seats, and it's kind of essential, especially for a documentary, to do outreach. I know you've talked about it a little bit, but do you have any other tips in this regard? What's interesting to me at the beginning of working with you is that, you're the first filmmaker that came along. You really at the beginning wanted to have a different outreach person in every single city. And I was
Mhm.
like going, Sandy, that's like, I've never been a filmmaker doing that. Because it's also, we have a question in the chat about time management. It's like,
Yeah.
oh my God, if you're in 50 cities, that's 50 different local impact producers. And they're, yeah. So, but I think you eventually had like a couple of people, and now you have that one person who's working for you, you
Yeah.
know, yeah,
I,
nationally.
I
So I
have
think it
Rebecca.
became a little bit of a hybrid, if you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, because I really believe in local knowledge and local connections. Um, people know their own city best. So it was like, I'm just gonna, but in the end, that's not sustainable. And so I have like Eliza, I also have Rebecca. Um, and they're doing amazing work. And I had Cindy, and so I had like a combination of sometimes people who are based in the New York, Philly, and then sometimes local people. And I
Hmm.
just determination. Sometimes it was just guided by like, oh, Boston. Actually, I have a lot of contacts in Boston,
Hmm.
or DC. Like I really feel like I could, manifest DC. Um, but, like in Dallas, I really didn't know many people at all. And we had not that many people come to the Texas theater. But what
Hmm.
was so interesting is that somebody who came to the theater is involved in Fort Worth in a interesting Jewish spiritual community. And they wound up reaching out to the Fort Worth Museum of Modern Art. So
Hmm.
out of that smaller screening, generated a non-theatrical booking at the museum,
Hmm.
packed, and they really like flew me in, paid a great rental fee. And so, sometimes these things are seeds too, like to get to other bookings in a place. Um,
Hmm.
and like I can just keep pointing like what happened in, kind of
Yeah, yeah.
Hudson Rhinebeck, but it's sort of like thinking about wave one and wave two, you know,
Hmm.
three, like what does it mean to keep returning to a place, like we did well at Coolidge Corner and sold out. Oh, now we're going to open at the West Newton Cinema, in Boston and have a full week run there. And just like keeping on building from like all of your appearances and work of a film in a city.
Yeah, maybe it's time before we get onto the other butts and seats things, as we were going to talk later, but like just
Yeah,
the resources that you had to raise, like,
yeah,
for something, especially a release this long
yeah.
is, yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think so I did sign with Film Collaborative, which is Jeffrey Winter's outfit, and that was for film festivals.
Hmm.
So they book and get rental fees from film festivals, and they have they don't have a large portfolio of films, but they're just great. I mean, they're amazing. And then I
Hmm.
paired upon Jeffrey's suggestion, Jessica Rosner, who's another theatrical booker who really did our Jewish film festivals. And so I was getting, rental fees from film festivals. I was also getting from our, released theatrical splits. But really key in all this is also philanthropy. I was raising money from, donors and foundations for education and impact to be able to do this work. And that was key because, the festival fees and the theatrical to do this large of a, you know, like city by city powered release in multiple countries, you need to have like a lot of resources. So, and I'm still like, I'm thinking of this, like, I'm just beginning.
Hmm.
I'm thinking this is 2 more years. Like I am sure the theatrical there I put the theatrical a bit on pause right now for the fall so that I can do international. And in fact, like in a few hours, I'm flying to Oslo. Um, and then I come back and then I'm going to a festival in Telluride, but I've really like this fall, I'm trying to push more into Europe. I'm going to Brazil and so I'm going to pick up some of those theatrical bookings in the winter.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's this film that does like it's an evergreen film. It doesn't have like a timestamp on it. So, if there's demand, people will book it. And we've grossed now, I don't know what we're up to now, 120,000, 110, something.
Around there, 119. Yeah, theatrically. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think like so team members, I did hire a fundraiser and I've never done that
Hmm.
before. It's always been me who's fundraised and I do it with them, but I have someone on a monthly retainer. And
Oh.
that's really, really helpful. Hiring my first full-time staff person, really important. Like this was getting out of control. Having like, part-time outreach people. Had, I have a social media director,
Mhm.
and that's been a critical, critical piece. And we really only focus on Instagram. So I created my own private, I have my own private Instagram. Um, and, I don't make that public. I have to accept people, but I have a public Sabbath Queen film handle. And sometimes I collab between the two from Sabbath Queen Film. But, that person, I actually just switched up. I had a really great company called Secret Order Studios because my EP Adrian Salpeter is like a marketer and a brander, and he brought them in. So, and then I just switched to somebody named Alyssa, and she's been great. And a lot of
So
it, yeah,
so just getting into the
yeah,
back to butts and seats. And so how like, you know, I don't know whether you can create percentages of how many people are there because of outreach and then how many are there because you feel because of organic social. I mean, I know organic social there, the importance of organic social varies, I think, film to film. Part of it is, how much of an online community can you create around the film, which I
yeah.
think there was one for yours. But like, how important do you feel, how much of organic social did you feel really filled, resulted in butts and seats or other aspects of the release?
I think it was sometimes I actually would boost a post in a city and I would pay for
Hmm.
like 5 days of like, I wouldn't put too much money in, but sometimes I would boost a post, to
Hmm.
a place where I may not have had as many connections. Um, but I don't think I think it was not an insignificant number. I mean,
Hmm.
I think now we're in this place where people are telling friends and relatives and colleagues across the country, like, oh my gosh, it's going, like, people are tracking our Sabbath
Hmm.
film. I'm sure there are some people here who, are here because they, saw the film or heard it from somebody, or we've met at a festival. Um, and, but yeah, I think it's been really critical. I would um, also say that I have a newsletter that goes out usually about once a month. So I have a newsletter designer and I also have a website designer, and I'm constantly having them update, like our screenings page too. So there's like
Hmm.
there's a promotion marketing ecosystem here between, our website, our Instagram. I post directly on Facebook. Most people these days are not putting sort of social media direction. I also determined that the rabbi is not a TikTok rabbi. Like he could be, but that's not his medium. So it was
Hmm.
just really important to figure out sort of what platforms like feel organic to the team. But he has a very big social, following on Instagram. So we often collab with him and with Labshul as well. And so that has driven a lot of people too, being able to have this kind of real coalition, of platforms together.
Hmm. And how, moving on to like, and then how important is press? Like press
Mhm.
used to be, and still one of the reasons that you do a theatrical release is because that's what's going to trigger press. But
Yeah.
press is pretty complicated for docs these days. And
Mhm.
so,
Yeah.
did you feel that, just as an overall question, do you feel that people came because they saw a review, like a traditional press review, or because some films don't feel like it has a an impact? But yeah, I'm just kind of curious how you felt press affected the release, and if I know you have a couple of things to say about press.
Yeah. I mean, I think press has been very different from when I've previously released films. Um, there's um it's just like, first of all, the world of journalism, the world of publications has gone through their own collapse. And the number of film critics has been reduced, and the number of pages devoted to documentary. And also, if you're now doing a theatrical release where you're not getting a week run in a city, then it's a little tougher. Like in the Bay Area, we were the closing night of the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. That meant that we had 700 people at our premiere. We then went back for theatrical and had two, and I think they extended for three dates at the Roxy. And we've gone back three separate times. I've gone back three separate times to the Elmwood in Berkeley and also to Sebastopol, which became kind of a theater in a city that I didn't even know would be such a big draw. But we sold out like, I think, 275 seats for Sebastopol and Sonoma. So the whole kind of Northern California, the Bay Area, has been packed, but we have not been able to get a coverage in the San Francisco Chronicle because nothing was a week run. So,
Mhm.
that's been the kind of frustrating side. The beautiful side has been that we're keep gaining momentum. That, we were at the Coolidge Corner and, I provided each theater with marketing materials and a press release. So they didn't have to
Mhm.
create it on their own. We just gave it to them.
Mhm.
And, with
Mhm.
Cindy, I connected to the marketing or social person, at the cinema. And sometimes we generated a story and sometimes they generated a story. But, in Detroit, we just got on public radio and I did an interview with public radio. In New Orleans, we just got the Gambit, which is like the premier kind of, you know, New Orleans platform for entertainment and arts. And in Houston, we were in the Houston Chronicle. But
Mhm.
it just depends on each city. And yeah, like some cities, it's like we're flying, and some cities, it's been a little tougher to get.
Mhm.
So, you know, but I think providing as much material, sometimes we just did our own outreach, or sometimes and I said, oh, okay, so let's reach out to these reporters. And we did our research. Sometimes the theater would just provide us with a list of emails for reporters, and we had to send it out and handle it on our own. So,
Mhm.
but it is definitely different these days. Um, and also like trying to think about influencers and bringing them into, we had for our theatrical in New York, we brought in an influencer who's actually like a drag Jewish, kind of celeb and but like on the rise. But yeah, I mean they were enthusiastically coming in full drag to our Sabbath Queen Friday night feast in New York and then posting on their Instagram. But some of those influencers, like if they want to come to your, like if you want them to moderate your Q&A, you have to pay them. If you want them to
Mhm.
post for the film, you have to pay them. And we didn't really um, pursue that strategy. Um,
Mhm.
we were trying to create more.
You did not pursue the paid influencer strategy, but when influencers, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's
Um,
sort of like defining who was not yet like at a level where they would have such a demand, but we're just enthusiastically trying to bring their, you know, 3,500 followers, their 1,500 followers, or you know, like who we could reach, who had reach, but like isn't yet like laying down a kind of a deal memo.
right, right. And so what else do you feel like we've covered a lot? Anything else that we've missed in terms of what you felt, helped get people into theaters?
Um, I
Anything like that we haven't covered that you thought was, you know, uh, oh, there's someone has to take a cup of coffee because I just said, again, if people are reading the chat. So,
I think that there are some times where it may not even necessarily be a theater, but like I was on tour. So, I did Western Canada and the Prairie States. Like I did Vancouver, this great cinema in Vancouver, which is connected to Vancouver Film Festival. And that was actually interesting because Vancouver Film Festival rejected the film, but they put us in their cinema.
mhm,
That was a great like outcome. And then I knew that I was also going to go to a film festival in Edmonton. And we tried to see if we could get a Winnipeg theater, but instead I actually went with a filmmaker, Noam Ganek, who I know, and he just took over a club,
mhm,
and did this great like night in this club. And now, like he really kind of curated like a lot of the art scene of Winnipeg, which is very vibrant art scene there. And had an apartment for me to stay in, and it
mhm,
was a pretty easy flight, flying Edmonton, Winnipeg, Vancouver. And so that wasn't a traditional cinema. It was like a club space, but it worked out really well. And what's interesting is that from that, someone who came is a professor at University of Manitoba in Winnipeg. And now I'm talking to them because I've just launched a Sabbath Queen College campus and high school tour. In fact, someone who's on here, Fran Sterling with Blue Shift Education, is working with us. And, we're really thinking and imagining like a whole education to high schools and colleges. So
Hmm.
some of this is also feeding, that whole tour. Um,
Hmm.
like I got approached in Detroit by a student who, is at the social work school of University of Michigan, and we have a call set up, in a few weeks to bring our whole tour to Michigan. And, I just had my first retrospective at the Wexner Center for the Arts in Columbus, Ohio, and that's like, generating, a booking potentially at Kenyon College. And so I really like these waves and all of this education and deeper work. um,
Well, just strategic, but to talk about strategically, like, it was one thing to start theatrical, like in the middle of festivals. That's one thing. But
yeah,
then generally for theatrical, if you're doing theatrical, you have to hold off on many educational, but especially community screenings, because you can't have a community screening in a town before a theatrical, and it can't even be promoted. So you were in general, patiently holding off on community screenings unless you knew that they're like in Winnipeg, where you knew there wasn't going to be a theatrical, then you could do a community screening
yeah,
there.
yeah.
But you're just starting in a sense to start, you're just in a sense starting on community screenings now, is that, or you have been for the last few months in a sense?
No, I mean, actually, well, that's not true. I mean, I played in Martha's Vineyard at a film festival, like the Martha's Vineyard, I think, International Film Festival. This theater owner, Richard Paradise. And then that was last summer. And then this
Hmm.
summer, I went back for the Martha's Vineyard Hebrew Center. So I feel
Hmm.
like once you do a festival, and then potentially also a theatrical in a city, or maybe you just do the festival because that place doesn't really have a theater, then I feel like I can open the door to non-theatrical. But
Hmm.
certainly campuses, I only started 2 weeks ago, and that's, 15 months later. Um, so yeah, synagogues, I kept saying, you have to hold off, and I have also many people asking me, like, when's it streaming? When's it going online? When can I was like, maybe 2027. I'm really, this is long tail. The minute that we go into streaming, a lot of this non-theatrical dries up, and we have not even like capitalized on that for impact, education, outreach, touring, money. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because early in our discussions was how to use this theatrical strategically for a sale in a sense. And I think originally you were hoping, like a lot of filmmakers are hoping for that sale or deal or whatever. But the thing is that, and it came up in a question, how is this related to sales? But like once you make that sale, if you make that sale, this is all, as Sandy said, this is gone, largely. I mean, it's not always gone, but it's largely gone.
Yeah.
And why turn over your film to an algorithmic driven tech company that is going to take control of it potentially,
Mhm.
and potentially a fraction of the audience is going to see it and won't have the depth of experience that these events are having.
Yeah.
So
And look, down the line, we could go to a streamer, broadcaster, but it's just not, it's very fraught right now with political content. We certainly have
mhm,
Gaza, as part of the film. So, I'm just being also realistic about like where, people are taking risks or not. And,
mhm,
but, I think at the same time, this is working, you know?
mhm,
I just met with Annie the other day. She's like, it's working. Keep
mhm,
going. Like you're doing great.
mhm.
And those like streamer broadcaster, like we can push them, down the line. So I
Yeah.
think it's a little more tricky internationally. I'm trying to see if I can raise money for a UK theatrical release and a Berlin theatrical release. And I have a partner in the UK and I have a theater in Berlin, but it's like, how do I raise the money to do this outside of North America?
Hmm.
That I'm still trying to see because those are two places where the film really does have like a theatrical audience.
Hmm. Right, right. So one, Rachel brought up earlier, like, how do you manage your time with all of this? Like, I know I view Sandy as kind of a machine, so but do you
Look,
have
I
any
mean,
tips for filmmakers for that?
I'm not raising kids, so I do think that that's like being a parent and doing this probably hard. Unless your kid can come on the road. My husband is a meditation teacher, so he's actually going to be he's been doing month-long silent retreats or 2.5 week silent retreats. So, we've been making it work in our relationship. But yeah, relationships. Luckily, I'm fed by so many of the people on the road, just like friend wise, spiritually, like actually it is I'm I'm living a game show. Like this
Hmm.
is your life. Like people from elementary school, high school, summer camp, college, the activist worlds that I've been in, like the progressive political organizing worlds, the queer worlds, the film worlds, Jihad for Love, which I produced, Trembling Before God. Like I am meeting my entire life. I've met all my cousins, like in every city. So, this is like deeply nurturing too. So it's not just like I'm trying to find either friends or friends of friends or family in various cities. And at least in the doc community, like that's such a sweet, like we do have like a very nourishing community, and it's been great to connect with filmmakers too in different places. So yeah, there's time, energy, and money. These are the quadrants, and sort of
Hmm.
determining. And also personality. Like this is not for everybody. Like I'm like there are filmmaker introvert friends who hate this. Like they just
Hmm.
maybe want to launch your film and that's it. And I absolutely respect that. Every filmmaker needs to find what fits them and fits their personality and fits their time. And, sometimes it's like making sure the protagonist has this journey with the film, and it's not necessarily the filmmaker, or it's, an organization that is willing to send people on the road, or is a network in different cities, and they do the Q&As with kind of leaders of the organization around this certain issue that the film holds. So, but yeah, time is like, yeah, I'm working all the time, you know,
Hmm.
like I'm
Right.
big nonstop and I'm devoting to this and I'm not right now like I have another film that I've been developing and researching, but like that is not what I'm spending most of my time on at all. So
Hmm.
it really is about, I'm like really focusing on Sabbath Queen.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to turn over to some audience questions, and then we'll end on tips, for filmmakers. And then, so one question that came up, it's come up a couple different ways. When did you start the impact campaign? And then another related question is, how did you work on impact, and what kind of work did you do prepping for distribution during the making of the film?
Mhm.
That whole, yeah.
Yeah, I would say there are two ways. One is that I did a lot of test screenings.
Mm.
I mean, I think my edit team was like, are we gonna like they was like shocked how many test screenings we did. But I also did like, this film took 6 years to edit. Like
Mhm.
it was a I had like 1,800, I mean, I filmed it over 21 years. I had 1,800 hours of footage. I had 1,100 hours that I gathered of archival. Like this was a mountain. So it was
Mhm.
a very complex film, lots of minefields like that I had to traverse. So, really testing it and hearing from audiences how they resonated with the film, what spoke to them, gave me a lot of insight into the outreach. And one
Mm.
thing that I did was I made sure to have one of our feedback screenings only for high school students, for
Mm.
teenagers, and for
Mm.
people in their early 20s. So I wanted
Mm.
to make sure that we would have a very different generational like view on the film. So that
Mhm.
was really helpful. And the other piece
Well,
was,
before you go into that, I just want to emphasize how important I think test screenings are, and to not just do them for the edit, but to also, I say this a lot, to use them for marketing research, just like what Sandy was doing.
yeah.
And, not just, like if you do a questionnaire, don't just ask about the things that you're wondering about the edit of the film, but ask marketing questions, have as many marketing questions about who this audience is, like who do they think should see it, that kind of thing. To Yeah, sorry. So what was the other?
Oh, there were two more. One is sort of poster, and the other one is benefit party. So poster, like it was very hard to figure out the tagline and the image for this film.
Mhm,
Thankfully, Adrian is so brilliant, and but it was a real tug because, like, do we go with more of a queer image? Do we go with, Amichai created a drag queen character. Is
mhm,
she like, is she the poster? And so we actually created multiple versions of marketing material. One where it's sort of like Amichai with a little bit of eyeliner, and he's wearing, like a tank top, and he's got this kind of
mhm,
to fill in phylacteries on his arm, and that was like young, sort of playful Amichai, but Jewish. Like you could see that, like, okay, he's got this, and a Jewish audience would be like, got it. And then we had the drag queen of Revitz and Hadassah as another image, and maybe that was more for queer audiences. But I could not find one image that would completely enclose everything about the film. Um,
mhm,
and so that was an interesting process, and testing it too, testing the title of the film. The
mhm,
film used to be called Rabbi, and my editor said, Sandy, this film cannot be called Rabbi. No one wants to see a film called Rabbi. And I was like, really? And then we changed it to, we think it should be Sabbath Queen. And, I had to be open. And, even though I've had the title Rabbi for like decades, whatever, 15 years, 16 years, 17 years of this film, um, I changed the title. And then I had so many people say, oh, I'm so glad you changed the title. You know,
mhm.
so I just think thinking about like testing title, testing marketing
Yeah,
material.
this is what studios do. They test everything. They test the film, they test the posters, they test the tagline,
Yeah.
etc. So,
So
and it's not, you can do it as you do a screening and then break the screening into focus groups, that's like a $50,000 spend from a studio to do that, like, or $100,000 spend, and you can do it on your own.
for free.
Yes,
I
exactly.
mean, the other thing is that just the way that I fundraised for this was, sort of in line with the way that we've moved it in distribution and impact and outreach, which is that, I wasn't like getting a broadcaster or a streamer underwriting this.
Mhm.
I held 15 benefit parties in cities across the US. And that was in Boston and DC. And, no surprise that I'm talking about these cities, San Francisco and LA and you know, um, Chicago, Miami, New York. So, Philly. So, in some sense, we were also coming back to a city after we had already generated like a whole circle around the film. And, sometimes those benefit parties led to somebody giving 5,000 to the film, or 25,000, or, maybe even becoming an executive producer level of the film. And sometimes it was like someone's giving $100, or, but it really is about
I think
building
I helped get some people out to one of your early ones.
good
What is it? I think it was
LA.
15 years ago. It's
Yeah.
just like,
Yes, it's huge. Look at that. Actually,
you know,
John, yeah, this is like how relationships happen, and how we build community around our movies and around our lives. Like, it's not like this film is like, it's not like there's my life and there's my movie. Like, there's an intertwining that's happening. Um, and yeah, so I think the fundraising strategy was sort of, foundational, to also thinking in advance to, yeah, like out of DC, I got a co-executive producer, out of the film, who came to a DC benefit, you know.
right. Yeah. All right, some other questions. Oh, we kind of talked about this a little bit, but this is a different angle, which is from Tyler. What can independent theaters do to help bring in audiences for films with a more grassroots approach to distribution?
Mm,
Um,
mhm. Um, I think that if they can work press magic, I think
mhm,
is really key. And really push like some of these sort of legacy media to, certainly um, you know, I mean, some theaters actually suggested moderators,
mhm,
their own kind of key moderator for, like, I think in West Newton, and that was great because that person was, had reach, also is at a university, and now we're talking to that university. So I think that is really key. Look, I mean, theaters sometimes just have limited bandwidth, but
yeah.
but
So yeah.
in the dream, would I love them to recommend like a hotel, a partnership with a hotel so that, maybe even home hospitality of a key member. Sometimes like I went to one theater that shall not be named, in I'll just say New Jersey. And this theater is a multi-arts complex, and they were having a meeting, like a members event, for the members of this arts complex, the same like right before our screening, but didn't let that members meeting know that there was a filmmaker who was actually coming to the town and doing a screening, and we could have had much more audience.
Right.
So I think like cultivating members, like I've seen so many theaters do it right. And just like really like when you show up, you're giving such a gift to an audience. You're giving such a gift to that independent cinema. And I am like deeply in love with art house cinemas and want to champion them. And like the lyric cinema in Fort Collins. Like, don't just go to the big cities. Like, that is also really important. Go to places where filmmakers don't often show up. And it is
Mhm.
a huge gift. Like, Fort Collins has an outdoor sculpture park. The night that I was there, they were doing a karaoke night with like from 8-year-olds to 80-year-olds, and clearly it was like a queer refuge in the city. But yeah, that was an incredible experience going to Fort Collins and the Loft Cinema in Tucson. Like
Yeah.
have
There are some, so there, I mean, art houses in general are very, connected to their audiences. The best ones have lists of have membership lists, have press lists, there's a marketing person that you can talk to, like that Sandy dealt with. But a lot of these, like the margins are very thin these days. Like since the pandemic, most art houses are still recovering from the pandemic
yeah.
and financially. And so their staffs are very stressed thin. And
Mhm.
so you want to be very respectful, and most art house theaters don't want to deal with filmmakers, like even if it's, because, sometimes filmmakers can be a little bit, demanding and kind of like, there can be a certain amount of egocentricity on the behalf of filmmakers who have dealt with theaters before. It's like, the world is not about, it's not the world of you. And I think, Sandy, I think partially you were successful because you approach, you don't, you have a, maybe talk about how you would approach the theaters, like that made the theaters kind of like really eager to work with you. I think you come from a very win-win. I think it's maybe your impact approach, because impact, you have to have this win-win kind of mentality. And in fact, almost like the partner wins more than you do. And do you
Mhm.
feel like that's kind of ingrained in you from your impact background? And that's kind of part of your approach where people can just feel that you want to make them succeed even more than you succeed in a sense?
Mhm. Yeah, there's absolutely reciprocity, and this collective effort that we're doing together. And then at the same time, I'm also really respectful of their time, of a theater's time, and
Mhm.
because they're opening multiple films. Mine's just one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
being like careful about communication and not bombardment, and
Hmm.
really but like their goal is butts and seats, and
Hmm.
it is to be a community institution, but it's also to like, and I'm trying to deliver audiences to them and have tickets be sold, you know.
Yeah.
But sometimes they just want to know, like, how many mics do you want on stage? Do you want chairs on stage? Like, how many tickets do you want us to set aside? Do you want to set aside a ticket for the moderator? Do you want to sit and watch a film or not? Like,
Mhm.
are you introducing the film? Like, there's just basic questions that every theater needs to know. And sometimes theaters are more engaged, like, oh, great, we have this press list, and oh, here's a
Mhm.
moderator. Oh, you should really connect with this organization in the city.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
and then just trying to feel out like where that theater is on it.
Yeah, just as an FYI, I'm working on an upcoming webinar with a couple of theaters to talk specifically about, how filmmakers can work with theaters and like suggestions for filmmakers and like what's the best way forward for collaboration between theaters and filmmakers in a sense. So that's coming up in the next months, at some point. Um, all right, so here's an interesting question from Kelsey. What advice on resiliency can you share from delivering a beautiful film 2 decades in the making? Like, I guess that how you survived and how you kept going for these 2+ decades.
Thankfully, my husband is a meditation teacher, so I really believe in meditation. I really like on the road, I. Try to do elliptical. I try to eat well, on the road. You know, if there's a pool that I can get access to, I try to swim.
Mhm.
Lots of hugs, you know, like really like feel the love. So I think that is, just trying to really like take care of mind, body, soul, as part of this. And look, because I'm being so fed by the people on the road, and that gives me fuel as, a maximalist and extrovert, that is also helpful. So, recording, like I actually am recording all of these Q&As, just iPhone. And these days, you don't need much more. It used to be that we would have to get a DP in the theater, and those are going to be precious memories. You
Mhm.
know, Also just to remember the things that audience members are saying. I think
Mhm.
that there's another aspect of this, which I realize I didn't touch on, which is that, like, I'm a story carrier. Like, I'm carrying the story of this release from city to city and theater to theater. So something that happens like in Hudson, New York, where a woman comes up to me and said, I am 23, and when I was 14, I stole a flip phone because I was ultra Orthodox and my dad's a rabbi, and we weren't allowed TV or internet. And so I had to steal a flip phone, and I Googled gay and Jewish, and I found Trembling Before God. And at midnight,
Wow.
I was under the covers, hiding it in my bed, scared my family would see me, and I watched Trembling on my flip phone. The next day, I contacted a Jewish queer organization. They gave me a plane ticket. I fled my family. I got disowned. I didn't even know what movie I was coming to see tonight. I was told by a rabbi that I should come see this. They gave me 2 tickets. I cried throughout the entire film, and only in the Q&A did I learn that you did Trembling Before God, and you changed my life. So, you know, that's extraordinary. And I'm just like remembering these moments, and like that is my fuel to keep going, the kind of impact that I'm having on people's lives and that connection that got made. And I would have never met her. I would have never heard this story unless I happened to go to the theatrical in Hudson.
Mhm.
But I can also now share that story with people and share a story about the impact of my work, but also just like how film can change lives. So, there's I'm really also archiving and building. Like I have like 200 pages of people writing me and posting about sort of Sabbath Queen's impact on them. So I think that is an element of this too, about both being a filmmaker, but also being a speaker with
Mhm.
my work, and really creating that. And that's also enabling me to go to college campuses and be able to do Q&As, because it's about the making of the film, but it's also about sort of how this film is touching people and moving people.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I almost feel like we should end on that, but there are a couple more questions. I mean, that's pretty, I felt that from my own work as well, and it's just it's really what I totally agree. It's kind of like what keeps you going. It's a tough, filmmaking is tough these days,
Mhm.
and so I actually do want to kind of end it on that. There is a question I wanted to, from Jennifer about like what the cost benefit of this. And I just want to say that it's very rare films these days will cover the marketing expenses of a theatrical release, especially of something this long. And I think Sandy already mentioned how much, fundraising went into support this. So, but even, I mean, theatrical has been considered quote unquote a loss leader for quite some time, even by the traditional film industry.
Mhm.
Um, and so the economics of theatrical rare, except for in kind of unicorn cases,
Mhm.
don't make a tremendous amount. I would say, especially of docs, I don't know, maybe 1% of films are covering their expenses through theatrical. I think that's No Other Land and basically Secret Mall Apartment are the two, maybe The Encampments, like I think you would have to, so these are just kind of like outliers in the current landscape. So,
Mhm.
um,
I think
um,
if you don't have a robust non-theatrical that all of this theatrical can generate, then yes. But I think because we really have this, I think something that can be supported by philanthropy that does have a real, kind of timeline around non-theatrical bookings. And, in non-theatrical, I'm not going everywhere. Like,
mhm,
there are many synagogues that want to book the film across the country. Some of them just don't have much money. I just got approached by a synagogue in Missoula, Montana. Like, they don't really have a budget. And, I mean, I'd love to go, but I have to say no, so I have to really think about, just getting rental fees from places. And so I think there's an offset that happens. Like, yes, maybe there's more money that gets spent in theatrical, but the non-theatrical is one that's actually very cheap to distribute. Um,
mhm.
and you can just
Yeah.
get, rental fees from the non-theatrical.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right. So before actually, there's a question from Fran, who you gave a shout out to
Yeah.
earlier. Hi, Fran, by the way. Educational work is on the horizon or here. Can you talk about the strategy for educational?
Uh,
Mhm.
In a
sure.
sense, in a sense, well, this is actually, yeah, can you, well, I'm talking, well, I don't know, Sandy, I don't know, Fran, do you want to join in? But Sandy, you guys can talk together or, I think, was that you, Fran, that was starting to talk?
It was, but I defer to Sandy.
No, I
Okay.
mean, Fran, if there's, I would just say that like what feels clear is that also generationally, you know, there's just not a lot of teenagers going to art house cinemas, you know
Mhm,
and 20 somethings. Like there is definitely, they have it depends. Like some theaters that I'm finding out, like if they're showing a repertory film, you have like a lot of young people going. But
mhm,
so, it's like bring it to where people are. So I think that, there's so much sort of sensitive, delicate educational conversation that we can do for high schools and colleges that like that is where I really want to put priority over the next 2 years. So, I mean, Fran and I are going back and forth, and Fran jump in, but we're thinking about like, do we want to create curriculum guides and study guides and modules? And, Fran is incredible. I mean, one of the leaders in the field. So, Fran, go ahead.
No, I would just add, part of it is really the spirit of Sandy's idea of long tail. So we're going to be piloting some content with educators and students and clubs, both queer spaces in schools, religious studies, camp groups, youth groups. So it's the big E education. It's not just school. It's, so much education happens outside of school. So we're really looking at a sort of a cornucopia of spaces where education using this film and also adapting to the time constraints that education has. So there'll be, short chapters based on themes with some content around it, but also more traditional content and trying to be really nimble with that. But I think at the heart of it is just like his test screenings. We're testing out content before we would go live with it to really make sure that we're meeting the audience's needs. Mostly youth, teenage, adolescent, high school, higher ed spaces more than anything. Probably not so much middle school, probably not a whole lot younger than that, but I think that's the only thing I'd add.
Mhm.
Mhm. Cool. And did you get a grant to do the high school outreach? Because high schools can be, doing outreach to high schools can be expensive in a sense because there's so many school districts everywhere that you have to, and I don't know whether Sandy and Fran you want to talk a little bit about that, but there is kind of a system to reach higher ed, like, and there's educational distributors, but my understanding that reaching high school is a little bit more difficult and is pretty specialized on some level.
Yeah, I mean, I think now five grant applications pending, um, for this work. So yeah, we've received one grant from this Jewish foundation, two grants from Jewish foundations, and one grant from a foundation that has some program that does faith funding and funding on LGBTQ issues.
Hmm.
So, I'll know more by the end of the fall, sort of where, you know, like what our funding is, but we're also now going to a lot of individual donors. Like it took a while to really like have our proposals and really work those and work the budgets and really figure this out, both
Hmm.
with fun and then with my fundraiser. And but yeah, now we have this like complete application.
Hmm.
And great. But yeah, doing that kind of education work does require funding.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Great. Okay. Well, what are your top tips for filmmakers doing well, you can talk in general and you can talk about all, tips for all aspects of distribution and, also for theatrical.
Yeah. Um, I really think, you're asking that big question about like, what is your priority? What is your priority? Like, how to define what you want to do with your film and really to like I'm terrible at this, but rank them. Like
Hmm.
is it just to like gain career? Is it just to gain money? Is it to just do this kind of audience powered reach and have experience and build community? Like, it's hard choices to make, but it determines everything. Um,
Hmm.
so I think doing like a really clear-headed look inside to see sort of, you know, and also just to, be in community. I do feel like we need community more than ever. So to really just relationship build, through the making and the movement of a film. And also just to realize that, you know, every filmmaker has assets. Sometimes we feel like we don't, um, that we're like going to these gatekeepers and they have all the power and they have all the money and they say yes or no. And like, I just want us to be um, not just kind of with a begging bowl, knocking on the door and hoping that the door is going to open, but realizing that we are all connected to communities, to issues, to platforms. Um, and I would do this work with Good Pitch, where we
Hmm.
would sort of a broad diagnosis, of what are the elements of your film? Like, what are the elements of your film? Like, let's think strategically and creatively. Wow, there's this incredible, platform. Oh, there's this amazing fashion designer who, like, it seems like their story is your story. Like, is there a way to reach them? Is there a store, or a brand that can be aligned with the film? Like, just kind of thinking like smashing the box, being outside the box about anybody, any entity that can partner in any way with the movie. And I think that there's been like such creativity in so many people's work. Um, so I think just being open and creative and really thinking outside the box and being like adventurous and ambitious is really key.
Mhm.
Because sometimes partners are unexpected and they'll come from unexpected places. Um, so those would be ones that I'm thinking about right now.
Okay, that's great. Sandy, thank you
John,
so much.
you. Cindy,
It was
thank you.
it was actually a blessing for us to work together. It's been really lovely.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for, doing this webinar and imparting your wisdom and, you know, um, really, really appreciate it. And have a wonderful flight to Oslo,
Thank you.
as you keep going.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and we took a little break in August, but the just as the next I think the next webinar is going to be a webinar on merchandise coming up in November.
Mm.
So so stay tuned and we'll be announcing that. But Sandy, thank you so much.
Oh,
Obviously, everyone, if you're interested in what Sandy's doing, join his email list, which is on the website. And Sandy won't keep you too informed. I think you said 1 month, once a month, right, Sandy?
and
And
being respectful and careful of not bombarding people. Yes.
yeah, and you'll see like, how he does it. So anyway, thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you everyone for joining
Thanks,
us.
everyone.
Lovely seeing everyone.